You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese and Joe. This is a first for us. We have on a guy who has his own endorsement deal with Puma, and he's the first sports writer we're having on the show with us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Longtime sports reporter of the tri-state area. Uh, Started actually at the Connecticut Post before he moved on to New York Post. He's been the Mets beat writer now for well over a decade. Really, really excited to have him on. I know you are, being you're a huge Mets fan. So let's get to it. Mr. Mike Puma. Mike, good morning.
How
Welcome
you
to
guys?
the show. How are you?
Good. How you guys doing today?
We are doing good. So I alluded to your endorsement deal with Puma. I remember you sent out a tweet maybe two spring trainings ago. Was it Alonzo or was it Noah Syndergaard who pointed that out to you?
It's Alonzo who's always on my case when I don't have my Puma sneakers. I do have a pair of Pumas that I sometimes wear, and I hadn't worn them since I was a kid, and I got a pair a year or two ago, and now whenever I don't wear them, I catch hell from Pete Alonso about it.
So Alonzo, when you're wearing Nikes, Alonzo's like, "What is going on here?"
Yeah. Or if I'm wearing regular shoes, he doesn't want to see that either.
You're basically a walking billboard to him, which is funny. So, Mike, we appreciate you coming on here. We want to first briefly we do it all our guests and walk through your career. So, when did you know that you wanted to pursue a career in either journalism or sports? Was it when you were at Fordham, or was it earlier than that?
Yeah, I was probably before that, probably going back to seventh, eighth grade. I kind of knew, I wanted to go into broadcasting. I grew up in the 80s watching Vin Scully on the Game of the Week and, Dick Enberg and Pat Summerall, all those guys. And that's the route I wanted to go. And, I did broadcasting at Fordham at WFUV there, which has launched so many great careers. You look at Michael Kay and Mike Breen, Chris Carino does the Brooklyn Nets, was actually my broadcast partner at Fordham. But after school, I dabbled in different things. I was at ESPN radio when they were first getting started in 1992. And then I did some local play-by-play up in Connecticut. And I took a part-time newspaper job, not really knowing anything about print journalism, but the sports editor hired me because I had a good knowledge of local sports and thought I could be an asset to the department. So that was my introduction to sports journalism in Waterbury, Connecticut, the Waterbury Republican American. I found out I kind of liked that better than the broadcast side, so I stuck with that, and I was there 5 years, covered UConn women's basketball. Then went to, as you mentioned, I went to the Connecticut Post, and that's where I got my first exposure to covering Major League Baseball. 1998 was my first year, and that was kind of the New York guy. Did the Yankees and the Mets, kind of went back and forth between the two, and got to the New York Post in 2007, and I've been on the Mets beat. This will be season 12 coming up on the Mets beat. Time flies.
Yeah, time does fly. I remember, so I went to Marist College. I went up in Poughkeepsie. Nick is a
Okay.
graduate of St. John's. So we both come from communications-oriented programs. We wanted to do sports for a while.
Hmm.
We're doing it now. So our passion is here, just like you. I remember when I was at college, we had a special meeting, and Mike Breen came up to see the school, and we got to ask him questions and stuff. And he related his relationship with Michael Kay, his personal relationship, and what Fordham was able to afford to him. So it's really great that you came from that. It seems like a factory now for a lot of really local sports people. What was your favorite memory when you went to Fordham? Because I have to ask, because obviously I met Mike Breen. And what were your favorite early memories when you were living in Connecticut and you were working in Waterbury and you were working for the Connecticut Post? And what specific things or specific events or specific games that you got to do? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind from your early years?
Well, you mentioned Fordham. I mean, for me, it was a big thrill to the last time Fordham went to the NCAA tournament in men's basketball. It was my senior year at Fordham, 1992. I mean, unbelievable. They haven't been back there since. So that was fun that was fun for me being part of that. I did a lot of broadcasts. That was my senior year, and I did a lot of games with Chris Carino that year. Looking back on that, that was probably the highlight at Fordham, and then after that, working up in Connecticut. I look back at that as maybe the most fun I've ever had in my career was just getting started out, being the local guy in Waterbury, being the high school reporter. It was just it's just hard to describe. It was just so much fun that you'd go out to the games and people would generally be happy to see you, knew who you were. Um, the players, the kids love talking to you. They love seeing their name in the paper. It's a different vibe than the pro beat. It was a lot. It was a lot of fun getting started up in Connecticut, and then going to cover the UConn women's team right after they had won their first national championship, and now they win them all the time. And and working at the Connecticut Post, being in '98 when I started covering baseball, that was the Yankees' 125 win season, and Bobby Valentine was, a year and a half into his managerial tenure, and he was a local guy. He was a Stamford, Connecticut guy, so that was kind of a big deal for us at the Connecticut Post, and Valentine just made everything so exciting. He was he's as colorful a personality as New York baseball's ever had, So
Yeah, I got to meet him too. Really, really,
yeah.
really great guy.
So I just look at those years as just mostly a lot of fun. Now it's more business like, but back those years in the '90s was just fun.
So, Mike, while you're at the Connecticut Post, you're also doing some work for ESPN Classic as a researcher. What was that like, and what kind of projects were you working on? Because when I see ESPN Classic, I remember just they're showing the games, or you had the amazing show Cheap Seats. So I'm curious to know what programs you were working on.
Yeah, you mentioned Cheap Seats. That was one of the show, and I was kind of a researcher, fact checker. So they would send me the scripts for the shows ahead of time, just to look through them, to look for mistakes. And the big project at the time was their Sports Century series, which started right around the end of the 1999 2000, going into the new century, where they profiled the top. I think it started as the top 50 athletes of the century, and then they expanded it after they had the countdown from 50 to 1. That they did more shows. I think they added another 50 shows where they did profiles of, and those were so well done, researched and produced, and I had a lot of fun working on those shows. So I would write a lot of the bios for the website that corresponded with the show they were doing. Say they were doing a show on Frank Gifford, so I would write a 2,000 word biography on Frank Gifford's life for the website, or along those lines. I did a couple of dozen of those. Vince Lombardi. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones I did. John Wooden. That was a lot of fun, and just being part of something as big as that project, and because I had started, as I mentioned, at ESPN Radio in the early '90s when they were first getting started. So that kind of got my toe immersed into those waters, making some contacts up in Bristol, and when ESPN Radio first started, it was just weekends. It was Saturdays and Sundays. So that's kind of why I had to find the other job on the side, because I was only part-time employee there Saturdays and Sundays when the programming was on the air. So Friday, Monday through Friday, I had to find something else to do, and that's kind of what pushed me to spreading my wings a little bit, and ultimately ended up on the print side.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that at any point there were sports radio stations that weren't 24/7 sports, but the industry's changed greatly. One of the shows I remember on ESPN Classic was the Top 5 Reasons You Can't Blame with Brian Kenny. Brian Kenny, of course, now hosts MLB Now. on MLB Network. And I was talking to some people and said you were going to come on, and we had Adnan Virk, who's at MLB Network, who is occasionally on the MLB Now show. I think we need to get you on that show. We'll start the campaign somehow. And he said he absolutely loves your Twitter, and he loved all of your Godfather references to Sandy Alderson and Steve Cohen coming and cleaning that. So he wanted me to relay that message.
That's great. That's funny because I was reading my colleague Steve Serby did a Q&A with Steve Cohen the other day that ran in the Post, and Cohen made reference his favorite movie is The Godfather. So yeah, there's the Godfather references are always popular.
Yeah, and Mike, do you personally shop in the gourmet section, or you're looking more at the bargain hunter and meat and potatoes?
Yeah, I think I'm more in the bread aisle and maybe getting some yogurt or something like
that. Did you think that once you asked Sandy Alderson that in his introductory press conference that was going to continue to be something all off season everyone's going to be saying on all the networks?
Well, yeah, it's funny because this goes back years and years too of going to the GM meetings with Scott Boras, and it probably goes back about 8 or 9 years where Boras one year made just an offhanded remark about the supermarket and which aisle the Met, and it turned into a yearly tradition, kind of became a kind of a joke along the way, and now Boras prepares ahead of time because he knows usually me that's going to ask him, where are the Mets shop? This year there were no GM meetings because of the pandemic. So I actually texted Boras and said, what aisle are the Mets shop? And he gave, I'm trying to remember what the response, it was, I'd have to look back what the response was. It was something that didn't make a lot of sense, but so I think, Sandy Alderson is kind of in on the joke a little bit and comes to expect it. So I think he was probably prepared ahead of time for the question, but it's fun and it's a good analogy when you think about the supermarket. I'm trying to think. One year the Mets were shopping in the fruit and nuts section when they didn't have a lot of money to spend. Now they're in the gourmet aisle, and Boras wanted them in the meat aisle, and
I want to talk about your start with the New York Post, but real quick on we're talking the winter meetings and whatnot happening. How was that for you? I'm sure usually every December for the past 13 years, you're heading on the plane, you're with all your networking, you're with all the fellow writers, and you're getting the scoops, you're getting all the inside information, easy access to everybody. Scott Boras has his 2-hour impromptu press conference in the hotel lobby, which is always great, and you're always tweeting that out. But how was this experience this year, the virtual winter meetings in which essentially nothing happened and you were trying to get all the stories from home?
Yeah, it's been a lot different and a lot more difficult to do the job, and a lot less after 11 12, this will be my 12th season. After doing it for so long, you get into these natural biorhythms where you expect, okay, it's February 12th. I'm going to be going to spring training, and then it's April 1st. It's opening day, and it's October. It's the playoffs, and November the GM meetings, December the winter meeting. Now everything gets upended, and you wake up every day, and you're not quite sure, what time of year it is, or it's just been a different year for everybody. And yeah, this winter has been exceptionally slow. But yeah, trying to make heads or tails of what's going on has only been that much more difficult without those meetings and without the face-to-face contact. And, there's only so many Zoom calls you can do. And, a lot of this job is about personal relationships, and you don't get that sitting in front of a computer monitor.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Maybe it's time for another Puma mailbag off-season edition.
I did enough of those to keep me busy over the summer.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure if you didn't, everyone's going to ask you the same questions. But we'll get to some of that stuff. But I'm curious, how did you find out about the opening with the New York Post, and what was the application process, interview process like in order to get that position?
Well, so this was 2007 when I got hired. It was the winter of 2007, and Andrew Marchand had been at the Post, then was leaving, and now he's since rejoined us at the Post after going to ESPN. He's our our media reporter was leaving, but he had mentioned to me on his way out that he was departing, and there was an opening at the Post. And I had been at the Connecticut Post at that point for close to 10 years, and I'd been the New York guy. I got to know a lot of people bouncing around from the Jets and the Mets, the Yankees, Giants. So when Marchand was leaving the Post, he said, you know what? He was leaving on good terms. He said, I'm going to mention to the sports editor, I think you'd be a good fit here. And then Mike Vaccaro, our lead columnist at the Post, had been there a few years already, and I had known him, and he was he thought I was a good fit for the Post. So this kind of momentum kind of built from within the staff of people recommending me for the opening. It was a general assignment opening, which meant I'd be bouncing around doing a lot of different things, which kind of fit, which was fine because I was used to that because that was kind of my role when I was working at the Connecticut Post. I was bouncing from football to baseball, and the off. I was doing college basketball in the off season. Did a lot of Fairfield University basketball in the MAC back then. I covered them for 7 years every winter, and did some UConn in between in the NCAA tournament, the Big East tournament. So I had done golf too. So I had done a lot of different stuff. So I think that appealed to them. So I got the job in 2007 and spent it was about 3 years as a general assignment. And I was mainly backup on the Yankees, and Mets where most of my assignments were coming. And then when the Mets beat opened after the 2009 season, they gave it to me.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned Vaccaro. Obviously, we've been huge readers of him for a long time. I wanted to ask you about all your other colleagues who work at the Post, because I still think as much as the newspaper industry is kind of slowly deteriorating, I still think that there's a prominent desire in the New York market for people to read sports writing. And I think that goes along with you and Vaccaro, definitely Mark Berman, Larry Brooks. A lot of people still read those people. What is your relationship with those guys? Is it kind of a close-knit mentality at the Post? Do you guys understand, not so much that your backs are against the wall, but what you guys are doing is something that a lot of other regions in the country, their cities and their locales really, I guess, can't afford to do for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
New York we're lucky we live in the biggest media market in the world, but
Yeah,
how is your relationship with those people, and how does that work on a day-to-day basis?
Well, yeah. Now you mentioned a guy like Mark Berman. Now I used to see him from time to time when I was a general assignment guy, because I would be a sidebar guy at the Knicks games with him or at the Garden. Now I probably haven't seen Berman in close to a decade because our paths just don't cross. Larry Brooks I do see because he comes out and does baseball columns from time to time. When in the off season for hockey, and Larry is, Hockey Hall of Famer, and just guy with a world of experience, talented writer. Steve Serby, another guy who's been at the Post forever, and I look at him as part of the identity of the Post going back. I grew up reading Serby. I started reading the New York Post probably about 1980, 81, something like that. My dad would bring it home from work, and Serby was a guy I read. Now sometimes I look to my left and there's Serby sitting right there, and I'm working alongside of him all these years later. It's a great feeling. Vaccaro is, for my money, I don't know that there's a better sports columnist in the country than him. He's an immensely talented guy, works hard, knowledgeable. The amazing thing about him is he cranks out a column in 10 to 15 minutes. on deadline. He's a magician. You read it, you would think it was something he spent hours. Now in his head, it's been fermenting for hours as we go on. But for him to sit down and just go boom, 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 and I'm envious of people who can do that. Who could just sit down and crank something out in 10 or 15 minutes, and it's great work. I mean, he's a special guy.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to be able to crank something out. And I can only imagine, especially when you're working on a deadline and the score changes the opposite way, and you got to just. I mean, I always think about like when the Falcons blew it against the Patriots, everybody had to completely change their articles because everybody already had they were probably like, oh, 28-3, I'm done. Type it up. I'm ready. I'll watch the end of the game. Then bam, everything.
Well, that's a famous early edition of the Boston Globe that went to print. With the headline, reflecting that the Patriots had lost because they had already. It's amazing that got into print. But yeah, I mean, especially when you get to the postseason and all the games are 4 hours and you're running up to midnight and past midnight, and then the score changes in the ninth, and it can be hell on your stomach.
Mike, do you remember a few years ago the Mets were on the West Coast, and I think it was like a 16-17 inning game that ended like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning East Coast time. But what was that like for you?
I remember that game well. It was the Mets went to San Francisco. It was a 15 inning. That was one of the longest days I've ever had on the job because the Mets had played in Milwaukee the previous day, and there were Milwaukee is a small city. There's not a lot of flights out of there, so they played Milwaukee on a Sunday, and I remember I couldn't get out of Milwaukee until Monday morning, and there had been a plane, and so they were playing in San Francisco on that Monday night. So I had to fly Monday morning, and only compounding matters. There had been a plane crash at San Francisco International Airport. So, and one of the runways was closed, so they were canceling flights left and right into San Francisco. So I had to rebook a flight. I couldn't get it. The closest I could get was into Fresno, which is 180 miles from San Francisco. So I had to take from Milwaukee. I'm trying to remember what the connection route was. I think I went from Milwaukee to Phoenix to Fresno, then rented a car and drove, 3.5 hours. I got there right as the clubhouse was opening, probably around 3:45 local time in San Francisco. You're exhausted because I've been up since 5 a.m. to get on the plane in Milwaukee and then drive in 3 hours, and so you're already exhausted when you get to the ballpark. And then the game went 15 innings. It ended at about 12:30 local time, but it was like quarter. It was actually 1:45 local time. It's 3:45 back on the East Coast. And I remember, now I'm trying to remember what year this was. It had to be 2013 because Matt Harvey had a blister. And I remember after the game we're trying to find Matt Harvey. They played this 15 inning game, and we find out that Matt Harvey had a blister and was going to miss a start or something like that. And all hell was breaking loose after this 15 inning game, trying to find Matt Harvey. He didn't talk. By the time I got back to the hotel that night, I had been up 24 straight hours from, when we left Milwaukee. And that was one of, if not my longest, one of my longest days on the job. I do remember that game well.
And do you and your colleagues, do you guys hate the day games? Is it so tough the next morning to not only wake up, but then just to get the stories? People don't want to talk. And especially we've seen instances as of late where, the Mets are landing at the next destination 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and the schedule gets all out of whack. But what's the daily grind?
Well, with the day games, you're not going to get great clubhouse access. A lot of day games, just because of what you mentioned, where the team is landing at weird hours and what have you. And I actually like the day games because it gives you more time you're not scrambling on deadline as much, and you got some time to think about things. But, yeah, it can be tough if you have a late night game, the night before, and then you're getting up the next morning and getting to the ballpark at 9:30. Those can be tough turnarounds.
Absolutely. So in your time with the Post, there's been very significant time periods. Obviously, you first joined right after the Mets lose the NLCS. I'm sure at spring training, everyone's thinking they're going to the World Series. You're there for '07 and '08, the collapse. You're there for the opening of Citi Field in 2009. And then, of course, 2015, they get Cespedes. They go to the World Series. In between all that, you have Johan, Matt Harvey, DeGrom. In this whole time period you've been with the Post, what has been your most memorable or most favorite time periods or stories to cover?
Yeah, I think it had to be that whole run in 2015 to get to the World Series, just because it came out of the blue. You're sitting there in mid-July and heading into the trade deadline, and you're like, yeah, this team couldn't hit. I mean, remember they'd go out and get these great pitching performances, and they were losing, 2-1, 3-2. They just couldn't generate any offense, and just all of a sudden, and it really started, for my money, even before Cespedes. You go back those smaller trades that Sandy Alderson made, getting Kelly Johnson, Juan Uribe. Then they brought up Conforto, and then you go out and get Cespedes. And just that whole how quickly it transformed too, because you went from late July at the trade deadline where they looked like this team that's dead in the water, and within 2 to 3 weeks they're looking like world beaters. That Cespedes, the Cespedes trade, that just looked like a completely different team, and you didn't expect it. And I think that was the fun part of it. And then that postseason. Sweeping the NLCS was great in the World Series, but that Dodger series that was one of the great all-time Mets postseason series, the National League Division Series. You had the Utley breaking Rubin Tejada's leg. You had the drama going back to LA for Game 5, and DeGrom wasn't sharp, and were they going to pull him out early? You had Syndergaard warming up about 3 or 4 times. That, and Murphy getting hot. That was just a great series. And so I when I look back on these 11 seasons, that's probably the highlight there. Santana no-hitter. I was at that game. That was the night I would have been off because they were coming off of a road trip. And somehow I ended up working that Friday night. A lot of the beat guys were off, and I remember being sick. I had some kind of had some kind of chest cold or something like that. I just felt awful that night. And then you look up in the 6th and 7th inning and you're like, wow, what's going on here? And so that whole thing was surreal to be at the first Mets no-hitter. I'm trying to think what else would stand out. Those are probably the 2 biggest things, because I got on the beat in 2010. Was the first season, Jerry Manuel's last year, and that was just the kind of the beginning of the decline years. They still had the stars then. They still had Beltran, they still had Reyes, but by that next year they were bringing in Terry Collins and really looking toward that rebuild where they were stripping things down and looking toward the young pitching that was coming along with the hopes that it would build back up.
Yeah, my most memorable thing from that time period is when Adam Rubin, your colleague, got called out. I mean, that must have been a surreal press conference.
Yeah. Now, that was 2009. That was the year before I got on the beat. I was still the backup guy, and I was off that day. So I wasn't there for that, but that's one of the craziest scenes of that era. I should mention I got a book coming out in April, If These Walls Could Talk, New York Mets, and I'm touching on basically the 20 years I've been around the Mets, going back to when I was at the Connecticut Post. So it starts kind of in the Valentine era in '98 and goes right up through to the beginning of the Mickey Callaway era. And yeah, the Adam Rubin scene, obviously Tony Bernazard was close to Omar Minaya at that point, and it stung Omar Minaya to have to fire Bernazard, and it just overflowed in that press conference, the tension and the emotion. So no, Adam Rubin now has been he's about 4 years removed from it. He's out at Stony Brook in athletic communications. Seems to be having a good time with that.
Yeah, he was great. He was a great beat reporter.
Yep.
And we appreciate his work. So Mike, I've been fortunate enough to work some professional events as press in the past, particularly like at MetLife Stadium or Madison Square Garden. And something I always enjoyed was the food in the press box. So I want to know what's your go-to snack or meal during the game, and how did you? Because I know when I first did some games, I was just going crazy. But obviously, you're doing the daily grind. You're in there every day. So how do you control yourself?
Yeah, it's tough, especially when you get a little deadline pressure and tension going there. The best place, and I think just about anybody who covers the National League would agree, the place to go is Philadelphia, because the food room in Philadelphia is legendary. They just have so many options. It's top notch food, but they also have the ice cream there. They have an older gentleman, Frank, who's been there forever, and he's got 6 different vats of ice cream with different flavors, and the ice cream in Philadelphia is pretty legendary. So that's kind of the go-to spot. When you're going to Philadelphia, that you don't have to seek out other options in the ballpark for eating, because there's going to be great food in the press dining room.
Yeah, great cheesesteaks. Shout out to Jim's Cheesesteaks.
Yeah,
one of my favorites.
Yes,
great location.
Yep.
You mentioned before, I want to touch on this quick. You mentioned the Johan Santana no-hitter. Great story of mine, really close friend of mine from high school. He was supposed to be at that game that night, but he wasn't because he was watching Steve Martin at the St. George Theater here on Staten Island. So, so he, diehard Met fan, organization's never seen a no-hitter before, had tickets that night. I think he gave them up to watch, obviously, to go watch the great Steve Martin and the show in the theater, and that didn't work out for him. But we always give him hell for it, because you miss the opportunity to miss a no-hitter. That's legitimately history. So
yeah,
I just want to throw that in there.
And I had when I was at the Connecticut Post, I had seen David Cohn's perfect game on Yogi Berra Day, and I had actually, the year before, I had been off, and I was living in Stamford, Connecticut at the time. David Wells took the perfect game in the middle innings. So I got off my couch, jumped into the car, and raced down to Yankee Stadium. And I actually got there for the final, I want to say 5 or 6 outs of Wells' perfect game, and was able to cover it for the paper. And but since those two, I hadn't seen one until Santana. And then let's see, 15. One I actually forgot about covering until years after the fact. I didn't realize it, and because it was so anticlimactic. I was at Max Scherzer's no-hitter at Citi Field against the Mets at the end of the 15 season. But at that point, there was so much excitement about the team going to the postseason, and it was kind of meaningless. And I had forgotten I actually covered another no-hitter, and it was Max Scherzer's against the Mets.
Mike, something that just came to my mind here as we were talking about historic moments and, Philly cheesesteaks. I believe in 2014, the Mets set a record and ate 103 cheesesteaks in one day, shattering the record books in Philadelphia. I know you didn't write that article. It was Mike Workanoff from the Star Ledger. But what do you remember about that? Do you know anything about it? And how much of an effort did Bartolo Colon put into that one?
The only thing I remember about that was I think it was Dave Raccanello, who's a longtime bullpen catcher for the Mets, might have eaten the most out of anybody. And I wish I remember what the number was, but yeah, that was one of those offbeat things. I'd like to get the number on how many cologne might have eaten. But yeah, that's about all I remember about was that Raccanello, the bullpen catcher, might have been the guy who ate the most out of the whole team.
So you've been with the Post covering the Mets, obviously at the top we alluded to, over 10 years. So I wanted to ask you the most important people that you've worked with through the years, and could be close colleagues at the Post, any types of relationships that you've developed with the players over the years. Because I feel like you ask any person who's very closely connected with the Mets or works in the Mets organization at this time or during this time period, and the first answer to me that I would imagine would come up would be somebody like David Wright. Obviously, David Wright is, El Capitan, Captain America, however you want to describe him. Just very, very super class act on and off the field. I know a close friend of mine who's had the privilege of meeting him a couple of times through the years, so he's got to be great. You mentioned before Pete Alonso. I'm sure Pete Alonso's great. Very, very class act too. Probably does a lot of stuff off the field. Keeps a consistent relationship with media and other people who work in the media who are friends of yours. So who are some of the closest people that you've gotten to work with over the years, and who are people that you've maintained relationships with through your years at the Post?
Well, starting my first year on the beat, that was a pretty good clubhouse because you had Jason Bay, who was there. Now he obviously had his troubles playing for the team, but he was great clubhouse presence, great stand-up guy. He had Jeff Francoeur, who was there, who's as funny as anybody I've ever covered. Just total off the cuff, and I still maintain contact with him to this day. I see him all the time because he does the Braves TV broadcasts. So when we go to Atlanta or they come into Citi Field, you see Frenchie around. One of the top guys. Another guy, and they only had him for a year. Another guy who falls in that category, Michael Kadire, was just a great clubhouse guy, a guy you could count on to tell you the truth. Was going to be at his locker, good times, bad times, and it's too bad how it worked out with him, and that he was at the end of the line when he got here, but was certainly a strong leadership presence in that 2015 clubhouse. Right, goes without saying, captain for a reason. Always at his locker, always there to take accountability. Was there were so many years back when I first started covering in 07, 08, before I was on the beat, when I was at the Post. Those first couple of years, Wright was still one of the young guys, but he became one of the go-to guys for the media in a hurry because he was so accountable and just had that it factor about him. And Billy Wagner was another guy when I first got there, and I've maintained a pretty good relationship with him over the years. He talked to me extensively for my book, and he's kind of one of the last of that old school generation. Things have kind of changed in the last 6-7 years, where used to be the veterans would give the rookies a hard time. You don't see that as much anymore. I think it's right away. A guy like Pete Alonso comes in, he wasn't catching too much flack from the veterans, and that's kind of changed over of what it was 8 years ago, where if you were a rookie, you kind of had to know your place a little bit. Terry Collins, I think I miss him more every day as Mets manager, just as we go along, because as we've gone along the line here, you're not going to see anybody like that anymore, as far as the way he dealt with the media and straightforward, honest to a fault.
I always remember we got a clubhouse full of guys in Las Vegas ready to come take their jobs. One of the best rents.
Yeah, I don't think Luis Rojas is going to say that anytime soon. Terry was the last of that breed, and he lasted, as long as he did, 7 full seasons, longest tenured manager in Mets history, and part of that was because he could deal with the media so well. He just, you have guys like Jim Leland, La Russa's back. Now La Russa's back with the White Sox. He certainly fits that mold, and there's still a couple of guys left. Terry Francona kind of fits the mold a little bit.
Gotta get Buck Showalter back in the game.
Showalter, but for the most part, the new breed of managers are nothing like Terry Collins.
Mike, I want to ask you about the new breed of writers, and your career here. I think Twitter has really changed the game here, because if you got to break something, I'm guessing now you're putting it out on Twitter because you got to be first. Whereas in the past, you probably call up the news desk and say, "Hey, we got this breaking news." So we just want to know your thoughts on how the media industry has changed from that perspective.
Yeah, now there's a back and forth on kind of how to do it, because obviously, my editors at the Post, if I have something, they want to get it on the Post website. We want to draw traffic to the Post website, because Twitter, you have to kind of decide, is it something you can wait long enough to get up on the New York Post website versus being first with it on Twitter. You're always kind of walking that line a little bit. But yeah, it has changed immensely over, when I first started on the beat in 2010, Twitter was in its infancy, and I really didn't pay much attention to it. Probably the first 2 or 3 seasons I was on the beat, it's just like, okay, it was kind of a novelty, and, and now it all the majority of the news is breaking on Twitter. But yeah, that's the line we're trying to walk, is getting the news on the New York Post website versus Twitter. You have to kind of gauge it a little bit. Is it something you can hold, 20 minutes to get up on time on the web? Most of the time it's not something you can hold, but there's still that maybe 10 to 20% of the time where if you hold it, you can get it on your own newspaper's website before having to put it on Twitter.
Yeah, I think the industry has certainly changed in that regard. But one thing that's still pretty prominently featured is the art of book writing. And one of my favorite writers is Ian O'Connor, somebody who I got to also meet when I went to Marist. So we're going to start to wrap things up here. Mike, we really, really appreciate you coming on with us. Towards the end of the show, this is always the spot where we, Nick and I, always allow our guests to share to listeners whatever they want to promote. Obviously, you have something to promote. You have a book coming out next year, If These Walls Could Talk, New York Mets stories from the dugout, locker room, and press box. Obviously, an assortment of great New York Mets stories, and you got to share a few with us today on this podcast, which we're really, really grateful for. So we will allow you to go ahead and share whatever you want from the book, whatever types of previews you got, places where you can sell it. But again, this was a lot of fun. We had enjoyed having you on. We will hope to have you on again once the season starts, and hopefully with everything going on in the world with the pandemic, baseball hopefully will start on time. Hopefully you can get back to some kind of normalcy, some kind of routine. Obviously this year has kind of upended a lot of things it used to do. But once again, really, really appreciate you having you on. The floor is yours. Go right ahead, Mike. Thank you for coming on. And happy New Year to you and your family as well.
Well, happy New Year, and it was fun being on here and reminiscing about going back all those years to get started. But the 2 things I would say is, one, my Twitter account is NYPost_Mets. I've tried to cut back on tweeting in recent years. Sometimes less is more, but
He's a must follow for all Mets fans.
yeah. And but the other thing is, my book is going to be published April 27th, 2021. So we're under 4 months to go here. If These Walls Could Talk, New York Mets. And it as I touched on a little bit, it's going to cover my 2 decades plus around the team, starting in the Valentine era in '98. And I got about 36 exclusive interviews of former players, executives. Noah Syndergaard talked to me extensively for the book, Zach Wheeler, and I think just about every manager. I'm trying to think if most of the managers of the last 20 years and general managers are in the book. Sandy Alderson, Omar Minaya, Jim Duquette, Steve Phillips, Valentine. I did not talk to Art Howe, but Terry Collins, obviously. So I think it's a fun book. I think Mets fans will enjoy it, and I think it's gonna uncover a few things that haven't been reported before. So
looking forward to the section on Willie Randolph's firing in the middle of the night on the West Coast.
Yeah, that's in there. Yeah, there's some perspective on that, and maybe a story or two that hasn't been told on that. So yeah, April 27th. I'm really looking forward to that. So thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, Mike, really appreciate it. I would love if we could get Terry Collins to do the audiobook of the reading. That would be fantastic. Especially at least the chapter on him would be funny. But I really appreciate it. We can literally talk to you all day here about baseball and your career in the Mets. So we appreciate your time. So that's going to do for this episode for our very special guest, Mike Puma of the New York Post and Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know All the Rights.